Hey, hello everybody. Welcome back. This is Professor Jason, Spanish and Portuguese, your source for excellent content, I hope, in Spanish and Portuguese. What I've put together for you on this occasion is a three-part series on basic Spanish pronunciation. So let me minimize myself over here, and then I'll explain a little bit more. We'll get into the content and preview this lesson. Wanted to share with you what my goals are for this three-part series on basic Spanish pronunciation. I'm trying to teach you the basics of Spanish pronunciation so that you can understand what sounds certain letters or letter combinations make and can confidently read Spanish and pronounce it well. Having said that, I want to share what I'm not trying to do with these lessons. I am not going to provide a comprehensive guide to Spanish phonetics or phonology. This is, make no mistake about it, a crash course. I'm also not going to teach you everything that you might want to know or need to know about the International Phonetic Alphabet, although we will use those symbols as we go forward. And I'm not trying to teach you how to produce phonemic or phonetic transcriptions. Now, who is my intended audience? Of course, it's all of you, but let me narrow that down a little bit. I'm targeting this three-part series for beginning learners of Spanish. If you're an intermediate or an advanced learner of Spanish, you've already covered this. You can already pronounce pretty well. This video is really intended for folks like performers, singers, maybe public officials, politicians, law enforcement, or healthcare professionals that need to be able to read Spanish from a page or a screen and pronounce it reasonably well. And this is not, my intended audience really are not language instructors or linguists, right? All right, so let's preview the content of each of the three lessons. In this lesson, part one, vowels and vowel combinations, I'm going to get into a few more notes on my approach and some caveats, some other things to keep in mind about pronunciation in general and spelling. Then we'll dive into looking at how we pronounce simple vowels and then vowel combinations. In part two, we're going to focus on the consonant letters and consonant sounds of Spanish. I'll cover a few more basic pronunciation, how we actually produce speech when we talk in part two, and then we'll focus on the consonant letters and sounds. Part three, we're going to tie it all together and apply what we've been learning, and we're going to practice with some song lyrics. We're also going to practice with a piece of poetry and then something for our friends in law enforcement, right? The Miranda warning to give sort of more like an everyday applied case of Spanish pronunciation. All right. But before we take a closer look at the vowels, right, I want to ask you to take a moment and please subscribe to Professor Jason Spanish and Portuguese, like this video, comment on it after you've watched it, and please share this content with anyone else who might find it interesting, useful, and helpful. All right, so before we get to the vowels and vowel letters and vowel sounds, a few more notes on my general approach and caveats, right? I'm going to be keeping these explanations as basic as possible. If you watch my content, you know I do like to get into the weeds, so that might be a challenge for me. I'll try to avoid technical terms, things like alveolar ridge, right, or voiceless palatal fricative, things like that. In lesson two, part two, I'll get into that a little bit more. I'll be using letters and letter combinations as starting points for exploring the sounds of Spanish. And also, I'll be relying on making comparisons to English sounds and modeling pronunciations. I will show the IPA, or International Phonetic Alphabet symbol for each sound, especially in lesson two, right? Not so much in this lesson on vowels, which is more straightforward. And I'm going to be modeling careful or more formal kinds of pronunciations. Of course, I won't have time to cover every possible sound or every possible way in which sounds can vary. And I also won't have time to get into several other aspects that influence pronunciation, such as rules for syllable formation, stress or intonation patterns, differences in dialects, etc. That would be an entire course on Spanish phonetics and phonology, and I will leave that to the specialists. Now, just a few more things to keep in mind as we go forward in this series. Let's talk a little bit about spelling, because I mentioned that I would be using letters, spelling, as a starting point. You got to understand that spelling is an imperfect, frozen in time way of representing the sounds of a language. So even Spanish doesn't have a so-called phonetic alphabet where you would have a one-to-one match between sounds and letters. For example, There are several silent letters or unexpected spellings in Spanish. The letter H is always silent. So we have some examples such as humo, haber, H, right? The word for the letter H itself. The H is always silent in Spanish, yet it shows up in spelling. The letter U sometimes is silent. So for example, after G and Q, but before E and I in words like guerra, guitarra, querer, or quince. So we see the letter U, we don't hear it. So again, not a phonetic, right, alphabet. The letter P is silent in words like psicología or psicosis or psicólogo, right? The sound E can be written with an I, with an HI, or just as the letter Y, right? Isla, hielo, E. So again, spelling is an imperfect representation, frozen in time as well, of the way that we speak. Another example, last example, the so-called rolled R, right? R, can be written as a simple R or RR. So look at the examples. Río, carro, hablar in some pronunciations. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that sounds tend to vary slightly depending on the sounds that come before them or more commonly after them, right? The linguists refer to this as assimilation or co-articulation. Stress and intonation patterns, dialectical differences, formal versus informal context, even the topic of conversation, these are factors that can also cause sounds to vary slightly from what I might present in this lesson. And then finally, words are not usually pronounced in isolation with pauses in between them. That's true of English as well, but Spanish in particular tends to connect words into longer, flowing segments without pauses. So we have to be careful about putting pauses between our words when we speak. Just a few examples that we will see these in lesson 3, the practice lesson, right? Tierra ensangrentada en tardes de toro. Tierra ensangrentada en tardes de toro. We don't pause in between the words, and any vowel sequences that are connecting words, right, will sort of run together. The second one is an example from Poema 20, I think it is, or maybe Poema 15 from Pablo Neruda, right? La noche está estrellada y ella no está conmigo. La noche está estrellada y ella no está conmigo. Right? So kind of two phonic segments in that, but they run together. And then here's one from the Miranda warning. Again, we'll see these in lesson 3. Tiene derecho a guardar silencio. Tiene derecho a guardar silencio. So the segments tend to run together. The words are not separated. And even in a simple everyday Spanish 101 expression, ¿Dónde está el baño? ¿Dónde está el baño? Right? ¿Dónde está el baño? The words, the sounds run together. We don't separate them. All right. So let's dive right in and talk about the vowel system of Spanish. Spanish has 5 basic vowel sounds corresponding to the 5 letters. So you can see them arranged on this chart. Some instructors will make a distinction between weak vowels, such as E and U, and strong vowels, E, O, A, right? These are also known as high or closed vowels, E, U, or mid, right, and low vowels or open vowels. The mid vowels being E, O, and the open or low vowel being A, right? So let's look at how these vowel sounds are written in Spanish, but also pronounced. So the sound E in Spanish can be written as the letter I, the sequence HI, or just the letter Y when it means and, the conjunction and, right? So we have words like isla, himno, piña, así, guía, note the silent U, guía, aquí, another silent U, and E. So again, this sound in Spanish is E, a closed high front vowel. Front refers to where in the mouth, right, the sound is produced. Okay. Second vowel, the back vowel, but also a high vowel, is U. U. So it's usually spelled, it's always spelled with just the letter U. It could be an HU, right? Uno, humido, luna, tribu. So I'm trying to show with these examples where the sound might appear in different contexts of the word. So our mid vowels, so it's a mid, somewhat fronted vowel, right, is written as the letter E. Ella, peso, libre, pague, silent U, pague, duque, duque. So regardless of where it appears in the word, its context, what other sounds are around it, this sound is always going to be E. There is a little bit of, here's a technical term coming up, allophonic variation, but if you pronounce this sound always as E, especially in careful speech, you'll be fine. All right, the other mid vowel, a little bit more back in the mouth, is O. O. Okay, so lips are rounded. O. Oro. Honor. Poco. Tono. Okay, so that sound is always the same. It's O. Okay, and then finally, the low vowel written as the letter A is A. So it's central, but it's low. A. A. Águila. Notice the two A's in that word. Águila. H-A. Halcón, silent H. Halcón. Clase. Mapa. Mapa. One thing to avoid is that many times in English in particular, when a vowel is not stressed, like the second syllable of mapa, we pronounce it weaker, right? We pronounce what the linguists call a schwa, which is the sound, right? In Spanish, especially careful Spanish, we want to avoid that and say mapa, mapa, and avoid saying mapa, mapa. Don't do that. Mapa. All right, and here on this slide, so those were the 5 basic vowels in Spanish, the 5 simple vowels and their corresponding spellings. I just wanted to pause here, speaking of spelling, and reiterate this idea that in the combinations GUE, GUI, QUE, and QUI, right, the U is silent, so only the second vowel is pronounced. So examples of GUE, guerra, pague, guerra, so only the and guerra, pague, or GUI, guía, guía, QUE, only the querer, querer, duque, so that second U in duque is silent, duque. And finally, QUI, an example would be quién, quién, or the word for 15, quince, quince. So we only hear the E, we don't hear the UI. Unless, right, unless, this is true, unless the U is marked with a diaeresis, or those 2 dots, right, above it. In German, they call it the umlaut, right? Then it's pronounced like a W, right? So, vergüenza, vergüenza. The U now sounds more like a W. Linguista, linguista. Pingüino, pingüino. All right, so now that we've talked about the simple vowels, A, E, I, O, U, what they sound like, how they're spelled, let's move on to talking about vowel combinations. So what happens when we have 2 vowels side by side? Well, a couple different things can happen, right? We can pronounce those vowels as 2 separate syllables. Now, there are rules for this, right? It's not a free-for-all, so I'm going to explain that. Those 2 vowels will be pronounced in 2 separate syllables, right? What is known as hiatus, right? Break, right? So that occurs separating those adjacent vowels into separate syllables generally occurs when both vowels are strong vowels. So a, e, o, otherwise known as mid vowels or low vowels, or when a weak vowel, such as an e or an u, a high vowel, has a written accent. So some examples, and we'll look at more examples, but just to sort of reiterate this point, right? So if we have the word real, you hear two syllables, that e, a, real, real, right? That's hiatus, pronouncing those vowels, that vowel combination in two distinct syllables. Another word, the word for oasis, oasis, oasis. So the word has three syllables, right? The first two is that vowel combination being separated. Oasis, oasis. And then finally, a low high vowel combination, but the high vowel or weak vowel has a written accent. In other words, it is stressed. So país, país, which means country. So that's hiatus, again, when we pronounce the vowel combination as two distinct syllables because one of them, they are both low or mid vowels, or one is a stressed high vowel. The other way, perhaps the more common way if we were to look at all the words in Spanish, is to pronounce two adjacent vowels as a single syllable. This is known as a diphthong, right? So when one of the vowels is an unstressed weak or high vowel, that E or U vowel, then the combination is usually, almost always, pronounced as a single syllable or a diphthong, right? Let's look at some examples. The word diente has two syllables. The first syllable has that vowel combination squished together, diente, right? Or the word suave, suave, suave. The first syllable has the U and the A pronounced together, suave. Another word that means careful or care, right? Cuidado, qui. That first syllable has a diphthong. The combination of those two vowels, in this case, they both happen to be high vowels, U and E, into a single syllable, cuidado. All right, let's look at some more examples of hiatus, or separating, those adjacent vowels into distinct syllables, which generally occurs when both the vowels in the combination are mid or low vowels, right? So the strong vowels, a, e, o, or when the weak vowel, e, u, has a written combination, a written accent, and it's stressed. All right, so let's look at some frequent combinations, or maybe some of them aren't quite super frequent, like a, in a word like asar, asar. So in a word like this, when the vowel, the strong vowel is the same vowel, like a, in asar, or contraataque, it's pronounced as two distinct syllables, or perhaps one slightly longer syllable. Contraataque, contraataque. Ae, paella, paella. Notice it is two distinct syllables, so the word has three syllables. Paella. Traer, traer. So we're separating those vowels, into distinct syllables. Aorta, aorta. Ahora, silent H. Ahora, ahora. Remember, I'm being careful not to pronounce that final unstressed a as a schwa, the sound. I'm not saying ahora, ahora. I'm not getting lazy. I'm saying ahora. Okay? And then finally, introducing some chaos. Caos, caos. Now, in informal speech, really in speech with any sort of velocity behind it, that's going to sound more like one syllable. Caos, caos, right? But in careful speech, we're going to maintain that hiatus that the rule dictates. Caos, caos. Anyways, you get my idea. All right, some more examples. E, a, e, o, right? So these are strong vowel or mid and low vowel combinations. Leer, leer, le he dicho. Notice here we have three words, so the idea of hiatus or diphthong holds not only within words, but also across words, right? Between words. Le he dicho, le he dicho. Real, teatro. So we're separating those two vowels in teatro into distinct syllables, giving the word 3 syllables. Teatro. And then finally, the word for mail or post office, correo, correo, correo. And then finally, let's look at o, oa, oe. Cooperar, cooperar. Lo otro, lo otro. Oasis, oa. Barbacoa, barbacoa. Again, 2 distinct syllables on that last vowel combination. Barbacoa, bohemia, bohemia, or bohemio. Okay? And then finally, again, we also will have hiatus if one of the vowels happens to be, or if we have a strong weak or weak strong combination, but that weak vowel is stressed and has a written accent. So, dia, rio, continua, país. I'm exaggerating a little bit, again, careful speech. Egoísta, baúl, reúne. Okay, let's look at some examples of when we have a 2-vowel combination, right? But it's a diphthong. So the pronunciation is both vowels as a single syllable, which occurs when the vowel combination involves an unstressed weak or high vowel, e or u, but it's not stressed. Okay, so I'm going to run through some combinations, right? We could have the vowel e before a, or o. Hacia. Odiar, odiar. So look at that second syllable, right? Diar, diar. It's what's called a rising diphthong because the second sound receives a little bit more emphasis. Hacia, hacia. Odiar, right? Diente, tiene, right? So it is a vowel combination that's smushed together, forming a diphthong, same syllable pronunciation. But the first vowel is slightly weaker. The second vowel receives more emphasis. Labio, labio, radio, rising diphthong, which I am very skillfully representing with the arrow pointing up. The vowel u before a, o. So again, more examples of a rising diphthong. The u here is going to sound like a kind of a weakened w. Agua, agua, suave, suave. So we're slightly opening, giving more emphasis to the second vowel in the combination. Muerto, muerto, sueño, sueño. Antiguo, antiguo. Continuo, continuo. So the U again sounds a little bit like a W. All right, we could have E after A, O, in which case it's going to be what the linguists call a semi-vowel, right? The E is going to be the weaker vowel, so these are falling diphthongs, right? The first sound has more emphasis, and that E has less emphasis. Aire, aire. Bailar, bailar. Seis, seis. Rey, notice here the E is spelled Y, right? Oigo, or soy. O-E, falling diphthong, soy. Again, artfully represented with a arrow pointing down. Going to our other weak vowel, U after A, O, in words like auto, auto, causa, causa. Avoid the schwa. Don't say causa, say causa. Deuda, Europa, lo unió. This one is less frequent, right? U, O, and a falling diphthong. Lo unió. In fact, there's only one word in Spanish that comes from Catalan that has this, but you see it between words. Lo usual, lo usual. And then finally, Sometimes the two weak vowels appear together with neither one of them being stressed. These tend to be pronounced as rising diphthongs, so ciudad, triunfo, viuda, fui, cuidar, circuito, Luis, ruina, ruina, and muy. For me, the last one, the way I pronounce it in my dialect, is more of a falling diphthong. In other words, the U, the U, has slightly more emphasis than the E. Muy, muy. All right, so we've covered simple vowels. We've covered two adjacent vowel combinations, both in hiatus and diphthongs. I just wanted to let you know that in Spanish, occasionally, it's not super frequent, but there are some three or triple vowel combinations that are also mushed together, if you will, into single syllables in Spanish. So they are triphthongs. Instead of diphthongs, triphthongs. Just a few examples of triphthongs. All right, cover that. So a word like despreciáis, which is a verb form. Despreciáis. You can see there on the screen that we have an E, an A, and then another E. Despreciáis. Apreciéis, also a verb form. Meow. Meow, which is the sound the cat makes. Opioide. Opioide. So we have E-O-E, opioide, in a single syllable, right? Opioide. Three syllables in the word, but the pioi in opioide is a single syllable with three vowel sounds. Triphthong. Bue. Bue, which means ox or oxen. Paraguay. The name for that country has a triphthong right at the end. Paraguay. Okay, that is it for my not so brief lesson on vowel letters and vowel sounds in Spanish, basic pronunciation. If you liked it, please subscribe to Professor Jason Spanish and Portuguese, like this particular video, leave a comment, and share this content with others who might be interested. I hope that this particular lesson was interesting, beneficial, informative. If so, watch the next video in the series, part 2, where I'm going to focus on consonant letters and their sounds.